Hello everyone, welcome back to the Trumpet Daily. As you know, America is experiencing an immigration crisis. Since last October, Border Patrol officers have intercepted 52,000 children and teens. 80% are from places like Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. And as we'll see, they are here to stay. So we have tens of thousands of illegal immigrants pouring over the border. Facilities are overwhelmed, Border Patrol agents are overwhelmed, and the border is vulnerable to even more illegal immigration, to drug cartels, and perhaps even to terrorists. But as we'll see, the worst danger of the entire immigration crisis is that America's own government is doing nothing to stop it. In some cases, they're actively working to cover it up. America has wealth, it has power, it has government, it has laws, it has law enforcement. It has the capacity to deal with this immigration crisis. But what it does not have is an honest and faithful administration that will execute the laws and preserve and protect the Constitution of the United States.
This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world.
And he said unto me, you must prophesy again.
Last week, Todd Starnes wrote an expose on the immigration crisis at Fox News. Let me just show you what he said July the 2nd. A government contracted security force threatened to arrest doctors and nurses if they divulged any information about the contagion threat at a refugee camp housing illegal alien children at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. So many of these workers spoke to Starnes in spite of an order to keep quiet. They came out and said something, talking about how the government officials wanted to confiscate their cell phones and told them to keep quiet about the contagious diseases that were coming into the United States. And you may have seen reports this week even on the strictures they put upon congressmen who wanted to go down and see these camps as well, that they couldn't take any electronics in with them. No pictures, no reporting on what's actually happening. That's all to be kept quiet, to be carefully concealed from average Americans. The article continued. Both the counselor and the nurse said their superiors tried to cover up the extent of the illnesses. They're trying to make it seem like it's not as bad as it really is. One of the nurses that Starnes talked about in his article had kept a detailed journal, and federal agents tried to confiscate that as well. Another nurse told Starnes that she became especially alarmed when she found out that many of these children were being transferred on domestic charter buses and planes. And Starnes went on to say in his article, were these kids transported to the camps before or after they were deloused? Anyone who flies the friendly skies could be facing a public health concern. So there's real concerns, and you can see why so many Americans are up in arms and frustrated by the lack of coverage, by the government's attempt to conceal what's happening. And in a lot of ways, the major media is complicit in this. There is some pretty detailed local reporting down in South Texas and Southern California and other places like that. But for the most part, it hasn't been covered as much as it should be. Now, there have been reports, fairly good coverage of the resistance that's there for, like in Murrieta, California, where they're busing in these illegals, and of course the locals are there very angry about what's happening, protesting against this, even turning some of the buses back. But, another aspect to that story is just the amount of work it takes to process those people and all the agents that are involved in processing as opposed to protecting the border or securing the border. Much of it just because the borders are being flooded with illegals Much of the attention now is on how to more efficiently process these people streaming across the border. Let me just show you a clip. This is from a report, I think from an ABC affiliate down in San Diego that talked to one of these Border Patrol agents.
As long as they're sending the bodies up there to be processed, there'll be no agents patrolling. And that's what the agency doesn't want me to say.
The agency doesn't want them to say that. And as long as they're busy processing, then there's not going to be enough out there on patrol. And so, in other words, the problem worsens. Now, last week, this was June 30th, when the president came out and finally commented on this humanitarian crisis, as he called it, and he made some interesting comments in that speech, not willing to take any of the blame himself, putting it instead on the Republicans. I'll get to that in just a second, but let me just show you first what he said about the crisis itself.
We now have an actual humanitarian crisis on the border that only underscores the need to drop the politics and fix our immigration system once and for all. In recent weeks, we've seen a surge of unaccompanied children arrive at the border, brought here and to other countries by smugglers and traffickers. The journey is unbelievably dangerous for these kids. The children who are fortunate enough to survive it will be taken care of while they go through the legal process, but in most cases that process will lead to them being sent back home.
Now, the truth is exactly the opposite, and many people are aware of this. Many people in Congress, many commentators know this, and I think most Americans are aware of the fact that they're not going to be sent home. They're going to blend right in to the 11 million others or so that are here illegally. In most cases, as he said there, they're not going to be sent home. They're going to be given a trial date, and just looking at previous history shows that 90% of these illegals aren't even going to show up for their trial date. And then of the 10% that do, just a small sliver are actually sent back. We're talking about just a tiny, tiny little increment. Most will continue to live here, and to say anything other than that is to be very dishonest, again, with the American people, to conceal the truth about what it is that's happening. This year, we're most likely going to have about 90,000 illegal or unaccompanied minors coming into this country. And these numbers are just skyrocketing. It's getting worse because the laws of the United States favor them coming in. Or when I say laws, actually, it's the United States stated declarations that they're not really going to enforce the laws. There have been some laws passed that do welcome those coming in that come from, violence-stricken or war-torn nations that aren't contiguous to the United States. But still, if an administration, any administration, would just simply enforce the laws, would just simply protect the borders, if any administration just simply had the will to enforce the laws, this problem could be corrected. President Obama talked about the need there to pass some kind of immigration reform because many of these folks coming in, as he called them, they don't know what the rules are. Well, really, you can look at it the other way. They know that the rules are not being enforced, so that's why they're flooding in. That's why they're turning themselves in. That's why they cross the border and they're looking for agents. Because they know they'll be given their court date, they know they can then go live with relatives, and they know they then won't show up for their court date a couple years down the road. And so they're in. They know how the system works. They know that there are no rules. Now, there's plenty of blame to go all the way around with legislation that President Bush signed off on in 2008. More recently, you've probably heard about DACA that President Obama signed off on in 2012. So the rules that are there are being relaxed. But more serious than that is just the fact that there's not the will. There just simply isn't the will to enforce the laws of the land. Let me give you a quote from Congressman Pat Meehan, who basically just gave the truth of the matter. He said, we're dealing with children, and we get it, but we ought not to be leaving the American people with the false impression that somehow the system is going to work and actually lead to the removals. Once those children are here, they are staying here. Once they're here, they're staying here. Now that's the truth of the matter. And that's what we should be hearing from the media. That's what we should be hearing from the government. I mean, there are those that talk about the system being broken, but then in the very next breath they're saying, but it's working and we're sending them back home. Well, it can't be both. It's either broken or it's working. It is broken, that's true. This is what Governor Rick Perry at Texas, I mean, some of these governors at the southern border, they are fretting over what to do, how to handle this situation that's just out of control. He said this on the Sunday talk shows, ABC, I believe, just this past week.
I have to believe that when you do not respond in any way, that you are either inept or you have some ulterior motive of which you are functioning from.
When you don't respond, and I mean, that's a pretty serious charge that he's making there. When you don't respond in any serious way, but you look at the lack of response and you have to wonder if the leaders are sitting there on their hands because they actually want this sort of thing to happen. Because they want open borders, or because they want to crash the system, or because they have some kind of political motivation. Whatever it is, nothing's happening. No one's doing anything about it. And America is being brought down. I mean, if you can't see that America is being besieged by lawlessness and chaos and anarchy, like at the southern border, then you're not paying close attention. Now, there's other movements at work here in the spirit world. We've talked to you a little bit about that before. Let me just take you back to the June 30th speech that the president gave there in the Rose Garden.
There are others in the Republican caucus in the House who are arguing that they can't act because they're mad at me about using my executive authority too broadly. This also makes no sense. I don't prefer taking administrative action. I'd rather see permanent fixes to the issue we face. Certainly that's true on immigration. I've made that clear multiple times. I would love nothing more than bipartisan legislation to pass the House, the Senate, land on my desk so I can sign it. That's true about immigration. That's true about the minimum wage. It's true about equal pay. There are a whole bunch of things where I would greatly prefer Congress actually do something. I take executive action only when we have a serious problem, a serious issue, and Congress chooses to do nothing. And in this situation, the failure of House Republicans to pass a darn bill is bad for our security, it's bad for our economy, and it's bad for our future.
It's a pretty revealing quote there on many levels, really, as he's putting the blame on this broken system. He's putting the blame on the Republicans, or the Tea Party to be more precise. He's admitting the system's broken, as I said, and yet in that same speech said that, well, most of these illegals are going to be sent home because of our legal system. But then, as you saw there, also within that quote, that familiar refrain that, well, if Congress doesn't act, I will. Pretty bold statement to make, acknowledging that if you don't do it the way this administration wants it to be done, or expects it to be done, then the White House will take the necessary steps. I mean, it really is a pretty good illustration of just how frightening the situation is in the United States right now, this spirit of lawlessness, where laws that are on the books aren't being upheld. And then laws that aren't on the books are being forced upon the public, or not applied when it isn't favorable to whatever the political ideology is. When a society becomes lawless, you know what the inevitable result is going to be. It's going to lead to chaos. It's going to lead to anarchy. And what we're seeing a lot of that right now at the southern border. The United States is experiencing that. And of course, as you know from Bible prophecies in Ezekiel 5 and elsewhere, it's going to spread. And those states that are maybe further north that don't really see this as a serious threat to them, they're going to start worrying soon, just like those people living down in South Texas and Southern California are becoming very concerned about this situation. All right, we'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll make a few more comments and turn to a few scriptures if you want to get your Bible in the meantime.
A turning point in recent history has gone almost entirely overlooked. Since that time, an unseen cause has brought about national and world troubles in unprecedented fashion. Crises are intensifying as never before. In our generation, we are seeing radical changes to culture, family, education, religion, science, finance, politics, international relations. Everything has been affected. You cannot understand events without recognizing this unseen cause. The United States has been shaken in astonishing fashion. Have you wondered why the world's #1 superpower is declining so rapidly? Are you concerned about where the current administration is leading this country? The Bible provides penetrating insight into the invisible cause of society's decline. America is prophesied to fall before it rises again. The Bible also gives extraordinary insight into how that fall will come about. This insight puts the seriousness and urgency of current events in their true perspective. Understand what's in store for America and why. Visit thetrumpet.com and click on the Literature tab to request this free, enlightening booklet, America Under Attack.
If you want to grab your Bible and turn to Isaiah 59, we'll look at a few scriptures there. And as you turn there, let me just read to you. We quoted this back a few months ago. This was from an op-ed piece written by Senator Ted Cruz titled The Imperial Presidency of Barack Obama from the Wall Street Journal back in January. He said, of all the troubling aspects of the Obama presidency, none is more dangerous than the president's persistent pattern of lawlessness, his willingness to disregard the written law and instead enforce his own policies via executive fiat. He says rule of law doesn't simply mean that society has laws. Dictatorships are often characterized by an abundance of laws. Rather, rule of law means that we are a nation ruled by laws, not men, that no one, and especially not the president, is above the law. For that reason, it says, the U.S. Constitution imposes on every president the express duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. That's the responsibility of a government official, to execute, to uphold the rule of law in the land. And we see that system deteriorating rapidly right before our eyes. Look at Isaiah 59 here, starting in verse 1. It says, behold, the Lord's hand is not shortened, that it cannot save, neither his ear heavy, that it cannot hear. But your iniquities, it says, have separated between you and your God, and your sins have hid his face from you, that he will not hear. That's verse 2. Isaiah here is describing this society burdened down with sin, burdened down, this sin-laden society. And notice what's happening. He goes on and describes in verse 3, for your hands are defiled with blood, and your fingers with iniquity. Your lips have spoken lies. Your tongue has uttered perverseness, it says. None calls for justice, nor any pleads for truth. They trust in vanity and speak lies, it says. They conceive mischief and bring forth iniquity. Isaiah is basically saying that when we become this steeped in sin, we're going to lose our understanding of, our appreciation for law, the rule of law, the foundation on which a society or a nation is built, where there's structure, where there's discipline. Today you just see a lot of human reasoning, Well, if you don't do what I want, then I'll take the action myself. Human reasoning. Romans 4:15, just to look at it briefly, for where no law is, there's no transgression. No law, no sin. Everybody thinks, well then, that's the optimum path to take. Because you can remove yourself from the burden of having to obey that old law, but what it leads to, of course, is anarchy. You can see that story at the end of the book of Judges. That's what Israel got into anciently, where every man just did what was right in his own eyes. And it was a dreadful, dreadful period in the history of ancient Israel. Chaos, disorder, anarchy. That was the state of Israel at the end of that period. And as I said before the break, I mean, that's, in a lot of ways, that's what's happening down at the border. Instead of enforcing the Constitution, so many of our leaders are actively and openly working to undermine it, calling it outdated, saying that it needs to be revised, saying that it doesn't apply to our day today. You have a lot of individuals, leaders, working actively against it. You see this spirit of lawlessness everywhere. I mean, it permeates our society now, even up to the top levels of America's government. I've talked before about the Lyceum address that President Lincoln gave long before he was president. He gave this when he was just in his 20s, back in 1838. The title of the speech was "The Perpetuation of Our Political Institutions." How is this going to continue? How are we going to perpetuate these institutions established by the founders? Well, his answer was that we have to be a law-abiding people. First, in the speech, he drew attention to the many blessings that God had bestowed upon this land. He said we find ourselves in the peaceful possession of the fairest portion of the earth as regards extent of territory, fertility of soil, and salubrity of climate. I mean, we've been given the very best, he said. We have been blessed like no people on this earth. And I mean, we owe a debt of gratitude to those who came before us and who blazed the trail and who got it all set up and established. And we've got to come under those laws that were established. Now, he said there's provisions in our government, in our Constitution, for revising laws or amending laws or adding laws. But just because it's a bad law or a law that you don't like, doesn't mean that you can just disregard it. You still have to enforce the rule of law. And then if you change it, make sure that you change the law lawfully. That's what Lincoln was talking about in this wonderful speech given by a young man. Imagine a man in his 20s today giving a speech with this much depth, with this much of a reverence for the law of the land, the supreme law. The government was responsible, Lincoln said, for strictly enforcing law, and every American, every citizen, every leader had a responsibility, was duty-bound, in fact, to obey the law of the land. He went on to say in this speech, "Let every man remember that to violate the law is to trample on the blood of his father and to tear the character of his own and his children's liberty. Let reverence for the laws be breathed by every American. Mother, to the lisping baby that prattles on her lap, let it be taught in schools, in seminaries, and in colleges. Let it be written in primers, spelling books, and in almanacs. Let it be preached from the pulpit, proclaimed in legislative halls, and enforced in courts of justice. And in short," he says, "let it become the political religion of the nation, and let the old and the young, the rich and the poor, the grave and the gay, of all sexes and tongues and colors and conditions, sacrifice unceasingly upon its altars." It's quite a statement about the sanctity of law, the rule of law. And just before making these powerful remarks here, Lincoln urged those listening to follow the example of the founders, those that established the rule of law, those that pledged their lives and their fortunes and their sacred honor, as he said, to defend and to uphold that rule of law. Now, as I say, you look around, and that's a big part of this story down at the southern border. Of course, there's many different angles that you could cover on this subject, but it does highlight the lawlessness of our society in so many ways. The people coming from Honduras see it. Our Border Patrol agents see it. They can see that the system's broken in Washington, and yet nothing, little or nothing, is done about it. A nation that's at war against the rule of law cannot last. Think about just what's happening on the southern border. It's unsustainable. No nation can survive with that sort of illegal immigration, with tens of thousands coming in. I mean, those are just the numbers I gave you earlier, were just the minors. No nation can survive continuing on the course that the United States is on. Going back to this speech, Lincoln said, "If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher." In other words, if we're going to end up destroyed in the end, it's going to be our own fault. It's going to be our own fault. Finally, he says, as a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide. Now, there's a lot of prophecies that talk about the enemies from without, and they're going to be coming upon America soon enough. But the reason why they come on this once great and powerful nation is because we will have been so weakened and sick from within because of these suicidal policies, because of these suicidal actions, because of this suicidal course that we're on. If destruction be our lot, we have ourselves to blame. That's essentially what Lincoln was saying there. Now, we've got a book. This is actually an e-book, so we don't have a printed version for you to call and receive. But if you're viewing this on your computer, you can get to this booklet within seconds. It's titled "Lawless: Why America is Losing Its Rule of Law." You can get this from the YouTube video. You can get it at thetrumpet.com, and I'd encourage you to go and to read and study this so that you're aware of what's coming. We're seeing the beginning stages of some very dark, dark times for the United States, and this will at least help you to understand the seriousness of the situation that we're in. We thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on the Trumpet Daily.